Morning all, I'd like to continue this morning on the theme of the isolated queen's pawn with a very interesting game example from the Gibraltar tournament of 2009. Garry Quillan, who was, I believe, an FM at the time and now is an international master, he was playing someone over 2700, Vugar Gashimov, 2723. So let's see this game and how the isolated queen's pawn played a role. So e4 from Quillan, c5 from Gashimov, knight f3, and now an accelerated fianchetto, an accelerated dragon, c3, bishop g7, d4, black takes, c takes, and now d5. Now if white plays e5, that's giving up the f5 square. Maybe black can use that f5 square, and maybe even can consider maneuvering a knight there at some point to f5. So white plays e takes d5. This is the decision we often kind of face. We have to sometimes accept the isolated queen's pawn. It may be the best thing to do, and aim for a dynamic game. It's clearly a structural weakness, and against a much higher rated player in this game, Gashimov 2723. So he doesn't automatically collect the pawn with his queen. He doesn't want the queen kicked. He just plays knight f6. After knight c3, now Gashimov castled, bishop c4, and black is in no hurry here. Knight bd7, slowly he's going to regain that pawn with knight b6. After castles, knight b6, the bishop drops back, and black regains the pawn. Knight f takes d5. Okay, here now we see rook e1. So white's got this pressure on the e file. This diagonal might be a little bit dangerous. This diagonal not as dangerous as usual because this structure is quite solid on the c2 to h7 diagonal. We see now bishop e6. Okay, and black might be considering to exchange off the light square bishops. After bishop g5, we see actually rook e8. And interestingly, in this position, technically there might be an opportunity afforded by rook e8, because the rook's slightly off f7 now, and it looks a little bit congested. Engines pick up actually an interesting possibility here of rook takes e6, which wasn't played. For example, f takes, queen e2, queen d7. And although the exchange down, a4 is actually very dangerous here to chase away this knight. Try and chase that way. a4, now knight e4 for c5, and again e6. There's some compensation here, which is an interesting position apparently from engine point of view. If e5 is forced as well, it doesn't look as though this is particularly healthy for black, this kind of continuation. In fact, big trouble here. So this is an engine line analysed before. Okay, so this kind of line with the exchange sack is very tempting on e6, and it demonstrates, tactical dynamic possibilities need to be factored in here if you're playing white, because you've got the structural weakness, and this is only a kind of short-term initiative. Once things get exchanged off, white could be faced with very little counterplay. We see, instead of rook e6 though, we see h3. Okay, and now knight c7, inviting an exchange of bishops. That's ignored with bishop f4. And now we see knight going back to d5, kind of teasing white a bit. So black wasn't really convinced with taking on b3 just then. Bishop e5, trying to weaken black's king now. This is the point of the bishop f4, just to try and exchange off this fianchetto bishop and try and use these weaknesses after. Knight takes c3, giving white this backward pawn on the semi-open file. And so c4 is also a nice blockade point, as mentioned in a key video yesterday actually about the general principles of the isolated queen's pawn. This exchange transaction now, c4 is a very natural blockade point. Bishop d5, and now white takes on g7, king takes g7, and now knight e5, which implies actually knight g4 would eye these two key squares. It's an attacking move. Of course, also bishop takes b3, queen takes. There's coordination on f7 to factor in. Although black might have queen d5 there. Black actually plays rook c8. It's starting to put pressure on c3. Queen d2. Eyeing h6. After rook c7, now we see knight g4. White has to play directly. Yes, he's got structural damage. Yes, black's got this fine c4 square. It looks as though black's kind of sitting on white structurally, on white structure. Queen d6, inviting queen h6, which at the moment seems fairly harmless. Rook e5, putting pressure on d5, preparing to double rooks. Rook ec8, and black is naturally targeting the c3 pawn. This looks as though this is a kind of, at the moment, a masterclass for playing black, because black has done a structural transition, doubled rooks, seems to have very significant pressure on the queen side. But white, after rook e1, although e7 seems securely defended, and it seems just a sort of defensive action against c3 here, there's more to it than that, than meets the eye here. And it really takes a strong dynamic tactical player to often play these sides where you have some structural damage, but you have piece pressure. The piece pressure, as Limzovich indicates, can be spent in the middle game and leaving one with a bad ending. But here we're still in the middle game, and black now plays the provocative h5. White plays queen h6 check. After king g8, if the knight retreats, then it looks as though white may as well resign in this position. After rook takes c3, it looks as though this is fairly hopeless. And you might think, well, rook takes h5, well, does that do anything? G takes, the queen is protected here, there's no pin on d6. In this position, though, I wonder if you can spot what Garry Quillan played. I'll give you a clue. It's a forcing move, and it's pretty essential in these positions with structural damage to be able to see your key forcing moves, because you're not going to have them later on. You're just going to have a lost endgame. So these are very important positions for the player with white, with structural damage, to seize every tactical opportunity available. So I wonder if you can spot Garry Quillan's next move. 10 seconds starting from now. Okay, the move here he played is rook e6. Very, very powerful move indeed. If let's just, I've got chess pace 12 by the way now, so I don't need to interfere with your board window. Let's just look at an obvious continuation, an obvious idea for black, just the take. Check. This is actually a forced mate. 95 threatening mate, and black would have to give up the queen. This is not very good at all. And in fact, the attack could rage on if a rook takes h5 here, even after giving up the queen. So black's faced with mate here. So that's not on the cards. Taking the rook. Black actually took on g4 now, and we see giving up the queen for rook and knight. So rook takes d6, e takes d6. In this position, h takes g4 was played, which is a good move. It doesn't give black, it still maintains a big advantage in the position. We're talking +3 or more. It's a big advantage, still retained. After bishop takes b3, a takes b3, rook takes c3. Black really wants to transition this into a rook and knight versus queen scenario to have kind of drawing chances, or a fortress drawing chances. And here, given that endgame scenario is probably to be avoided, white actually controls the c1 square here, so there's no rook c1 in this position. And in fact, in this move, unfortunately, Garry played rook e3, just swapping off a pair of rooks, potentially. But black, black didn't play rook takes e3. Black played an even stronger knight d5 here. But if we just go back to this position, as far as the isolated queen's pawn perspective, I still believe this game is a very good example, because white was winning this position actually. I wonder if you can spot a very, very powerful move which would secure a win here if I give you 10 seconds starting from now. The key thing is you don't want the endgame scenario of a pair of rooks coming off. So what would you play here if I give you 10 seconds starting from now? Okay, a crushing move would be g3 in this position, and the threat is king g2 and rook h1, just eyeing the h8 square. And this is like +8. For example, knight d5, king g2, and what is black doing against this rook h1? If, say, 3 to c7, rook h1, threatening mate, giving black a king an escape square. Strongest, maybe actually g5 here. Queen g6 is not so strong as actually technically g5. So say taking here, now queen takes g6, queen d takes d6, and you can see that black's falling to bits actually, for example like this. It's very unpleasant to place rook h8 here. So this kind of position is black's going to be mated basically. So this all stems actually from g3, which is very easy in hindsight to see with our engines that the move g3 here is an absolute crusher. But instead rook e3, and now black's got some drawing chances increased with this endgame scenario. After knight d5, pair of rooks coming off, the knight also stops entry to e7. So rook takes c3, knight takes e3, and after king f1, a5, we see black fighting back now. He establishes e4 for the knight. After f5, it looks dangerous for f6 though. We see rook c6 defending that, unfortunately adequately here. Queen f4, knight e4, and again f6 is really prevented. Check, king g7. It's more difficult for white than earlier. And now we see after queen takes b7, that's actually a blunder here. White was still better apparently with f takes g6, for example like this. Check, and queen takes f7. White still has some winning chances apparently, but it's not as easy as before. It's like +2, a little bit over +2. But in the game we see queen takes b7, and now the rook and knight coordinate. Check, check. And the problem here is it's a bit scary to have to play king f4 and face g5. King f4, g5. This is a little bit scary and probably pointless because it's now only about +1 here. It's unclear how white is actually going to win this sort of position. It's not as clear as before, for sure. Let's see. After king d6, rook c3. If taking here, rook takes b3, and that's kind of a fortress now. So this is why it's very, very tricky here. So in fact, Garry didn't play king f4 here. He played king e2, and we have a perpetual check continuation. So the rook and knight coordinated very well to salvage a draw. Okay, I just thought it was very interesting from the isolated queen's pawn perspective, the tactical dynamism which exists, especially in this game, the rook e6 opportunities. That's something to look out for. this action's on the E file with an active rook, if you've got the isolated queen's pawn with white. Okay, comments or questions on YouTube? Thanks very much.